Trash, poor people pretending to be classy? That was the sentence Brielle Carter threw straight at my face. I, Marvette Harrington, right before she tossed an heirloom ring worth over $165,000 into the trash as if it were an empty wrapper. But just a few seconds later, everything flipped. The phone in Elijah's hand lit up. Audio, images, evidence, and Brielle's true identity was exposed, drowning in debt, deceitful, greedy. She thought she could trample my family? No. She was the one who threw her entire life into that trash can. If you were in my place, would you stand up and expose her? Or stay silent while a disrespectful woman crushes your family's tradition? And if you were Elijah, would you have the courage to cut off a woman who betrayed you? Hit follow now and comment. What would you do if your daughter-in-law threw your family heirloom into the trash? I have always believed that some families exist not to flaunt their wealth, but to maintain a silence that makes others wary. My Harrington family is exactly that. We do not hang expensive paintings to show their value, nor do we throw extravagant parties to display our status. Every step we take is quiet, yet anyone who has heard our name understands one thing: they straighten their back when facing us. Harrington is not the name people casually mention at a dinner party. It is the name that makes them lower their voices. I grew up in that atmosphere, surrounded by heavy wooden rooms where every object held stories no one dared to ask about. And I, Marvette, am the one entrusted with guarding the soul of this house. A dark-skinned woman, African-American, not the type most people imagine when they think of old, wealthy families. Yet I am the one the ancestors chose to carry their traditions, their secrets, and their pride. I never need to raise my voice or confront anyone. I simply stand straight and look them in the eyes, and the room stills. People say my gaze makes them feel like their smallest faults are being exposed. Perhaps because I've lived too long among things that cannot be lost, I've learned to protect them with my silence. No one knows who my husband is or was. People speculate endlessly, from a mysterious businessman to a political figure of high rank. But the truth is simpler. No one has ever been close enough for me to tell. Harrington is not a place for outsiders' curiosity, and I never owe anyone an explanation. People see me walk into the living room, set down a cup of tea, look at the person across from me, and that is enough. The room quiets, not from fear, but from a respect they cannot name. When Elijah told me he wanted to bring a young woman into the house, I stayed silent. Not because I disapproved, but because I've always believed that a woman's true nature reveals itself the moment she steps into this home. And just as I sensed Brielle Carter did not arrive with the modesty of a future daughter-in-law, but with sharp eyes surveying the room as if she were pricing each object, I saw it immediately, the way she stood, as though choosing what was worthy of her. Brielle's beauty dazzled outsiders, but to me that beauty felt like a silk cloth hiding a troubling emptiness beneath. I quietly observed her, not out of jealousy or irritation, but because I've lived long enough to know that a greedy gaze can topple an entire family line. Brielle did not look at the house with curiosity, nor at Elijah with affection. She looked as if everything had a price, as long as someone paid enough, and that was what made my heart drop for a moment. Some people enter another's home with their heart. Others enter with a wallet that is never full. Elijah, on the other hand, was the opposite. My son looks at life with a kindness that borders on naive. He believes in the goodness of people, and that makes him far too easy to hurt. When he introduced Brielle to me, his eyes shone with the same light I saw when he was a child holding his first stray dog. That fragile light made me swallow back many words. I didn't want to break my son's heart, but I also didn't want Brielle's ambition to burn down the tradition of this family. I said very little during our first meeting. I simply stood there, nodded gently at Brielle, and offered a small smile. But the moment she extended her hand to shake mine, I felt something very clear. That hand did not carry respect. It carried the coldness of someone who only wants to grasp what benefits her. And from that moment, I knew. One day, that hand would dare to touch something it should never touch, and that day would not be peaceful. I remember that moment so clearly that every second feels carved into my memory. Sunlight touched the long wooden table in the living room, reflecting softly onto the velvet box I had placed in front of Brielle. The air seemed warm, yet I felt a chill sliding into every corner of the house. Elijah wasn't home. He said he'd be back late, and that was exactly why I wanted to test what this girl was truly bringing into my family. I opened the box, revealing the platinum ring with its gentle glow, a small light that carried the worth of generations of Harringtons. I looked at Brielle and spoke slowly, each word giving her the final chance she didn't know she needed. This is a Harrington heirloom. She didn't look at the ring with the reverence I expected. Instead, Brielle examined it the way someone inspects a discounted item. Her finger brushed the ring with careless indifference, her lips curving into a smug, dismissive smile. Looks like something from a clearance rack. That sentence slammed into my ears like a hard blow. The room grew heavy, and I felt even the old walls tremble at that insult. My ancestors protected this ring through years filled with secrets, and now it was reduced to a casual remark. I forced myself to stay composed. I didn't say anything. Silence sometimes reveals a person faster than confrontation. I turned away to take the water pitcher from the kitchen counter. 3 steps, that was all. When I turned back, the sight before me made my heart stall. Brielle stood next to the white trash bin near the cabinet, her hand relaxed. The ring dropped into the plastic liner with a faint sound, so small most people wouldn't notice. But I heard it distinctly, a dry, cold sound like something inside me cracking. Brielle didn't look down, didn't hesitate, didn't check. She simply threw it away as if discarding a piece of packaging. She calmly brushed off her hands, then walked back to the counter to retouch her lipstick, as if she'd done something perfectly ordinary. I stood motionless for several seconds, realizing I had just witnessed something any woman in this family would consider unforgivable. I moved toward the trash bin without a word. She watched me through the reflection of the kitchen backsplash, then added another sentence that made my scalp tingle. Trash. Poor people pretending to be classy. Every word from Brielle sliced like a blade. It wasn't about the ring itself. She insulted the entire family, our traditions, and all who lived and died to preserve the pride of the Harrington name. My ancestors survived hardship, crossed borders to protect what little they had, held on to this ring even when fleeing their homeland. And now a young woman, barely a year in this house, tossed everything aside with a few careless gestures. I looked into the trash bin. The ring lay among tissues and fruit peels. Its light still flickered stubborn, as if reminding me that what belongs to this family does not disappear easily. A sharp ache cut through my chest. I reached in and picked up the ring between 2 fingers. It was cold, but not as cold as Brielle's voice behind me. You know old pieces like that aren't worth much. Anyone can tell. I straightened, holding the ring as if I were holding the heart of my family. My silence turned sharper than any reply. Brielle still didn't understand. She turned away, adjusting her hair, adding another layer of lipstick, convinced she still controlled the situation. And that confidence told me everything. Brielle wasn't only disrespectful, she was blind to what her actions would cost her. I walked toward the doorway, intending to take the ring upstairs and lock it away from her careless eyes. But as I turned, I sensed someone standing at the living room entrance. Light from the porch stretched across the floor, revealing a familiar silhouette, one I could recognize instantly: Elijah. He stood still, saying nothing, his eyes red. I didn't need to ask. He had seen everything, and the storm had only just begun. Elijah stood in the doorway as if he had just stepped out of another world, a world where everything he once believed was shattering without a sound. The light from the porch cast a pale gold across his face, yet the redness in his eyes spoke louder than any words. I held the ring tightly in my hand, feeling the cold metal spread through my palm. Elijah walked into the room, each step heavy, as though he carried the weight of the moment on his shoulders. He stood in front of me trying to speak, but his throat seemed caught. His lips trembled slightly, just enough for me to know his heart had been torn apart. Elijah took his phone from his pocket, the screen still lit. He handed it to me, unable to speak for a few seconds, as if gathering strength from that silence. When I reached out to take it, he finally spoke, his voice rough. "Mom, I recorded everything. You don't deserve this." His words tangled together with anger, pain, and helplessness. I looked at the phone, the red recording icon glowing sharply against the dark background. The timer ran long enough to show he had been standing there much earlier than I realized, witnessing more than I wished he had. A part of me wanted to pull him into my arms, but another part understood he had to face this moment with the same eyes now wet with hurt. He sat down on the chair beside us, his hands clasped as if they needed a place to hold on to. "I tried to believe," Mom Elijah said, his voice breaking near the end. "I thought she would change, that she would love me the way I hoped. But you saw it. She never loved me." The sentence wasn't a confession. It was a wound. A deep wound opened right in front of me. Elijah had always believed in a type of love he was willing to protect with all his heart. But under the harsh light of truth, that belief shattered like glass on stone. I watched his fingers tremble, knowing the pain of a devoted son was far greater than anything I could measure. I placed the ring on the table, stood behind him, and rested my hand on his shoulder. That shoulder had once been small enough to fit perfectly under my arm. Now it was broader, stronger, yet it was shaking from a pain I could not shield him from. "Truth always comes," I said softly, "and it is never gentle." Elijah closed his eyes, holding his breath, as if wanting to press each word into his heart. The room sank into a silence heavy as granite, the silence of two people trying to accept that a door had closed forever. He opened his eyes and looked at the ring lying on the table. "You carried it all your life," he said, his voice small but unwavering. "And she threw it away without a second thought." Each word carried a bitterness I could see plainly. Elijah wasn't hurt only by Brielle's actions. He was hurt because he now understood she never respected anything from this family. His gaze on the ring was the gaze of someone seeing a part of his lineage shattered. I knew he was blaming himself for bringing someone like her into this home. And I knew that pain cut deeper than her insults toward me. Elijah leaned forward, lifted the phone again, and opened another folder. His hand hesitated for a moment, then stopped, as if preparing to peel away the final layer protecting his heart. I saw the resolve forming in his eyes, a resolve that told me this story would move into a direction with no easy return. Elijah held the phone toward me again, But this time, the screen was no longer the recording. He drew a long breath, his eyes still red, but his voice firmer, as though a part of him had grown older in that single moment. "Mom," Elijah said, his knuckles turning white from the grip, "there's something else you need to see." He tapped the screen and opened Brielle's debt records. Elijah handed me the phone, and the numbers on the screen thickened the air in the room. A long list of loans, overdue payments, constant reminders from creditors. A total of $48,500. I read each item as if watching layers of Brielle's mask fall away. The amount itself did not shock me. What chilled me was the way she let everything pile up, as if someone else was always there to clean up after her. Elijah stood beside me, his shoulders heavy, as he watched me scroll through the debts, the luxury purchases Brielle could never afford. I understood immediately that this was not a financial problem. It was a sign of a lifestyle built on the assumption that spending other people's money was her right. Designer handbags, shoes she never wore twice, lavish spa sessions, all of it appeared in her unpaid statements. My eyes stopped at a particular charge, a jewelry purchase of nearly $6,000, also unpaid. A weight settled on my chest. A woman who cannot keep her word over money will not keep anything else. Elijah clasped his hands, his voice trembling. "Mom, this is just the surface." Before I could speak, Elijah opened another folder. Messages. Lines and lines of words flashing on the screen like blades. A conversation between Brielle and Tasha Monroe, the friend I once thought harmless. "Marrying Elijah changes my life. His family's rich. Why would I let go?" Every word hit like hail. I did not feel anger for myself, but for Elijah, who had loved her with the honesty of a young man who believed love could change people. I glanced at him and saw disappointment deep enough to hollow a person out. Elijah bit his lip, trying to keep his voice steady. "I didn't think she talked about me like that. I didn't think." He paused, took a hard breath, as if each word scraped his throat. I touched his shoulder, then looked back at the screen. What stung me was not the insult, but the cold calculation behind it. Brielle never loved Elijah. She targeted the Harrington name. It pulled every string inside me tight. I now recalled the first day she entered our home, her eyes darting across the room. That gaze had never been wonder. It had been appraisal. Elijah tapped on another video. I leaned closer. Footage from the storage room's camera. Late at night, dim lighting, but Brielle's face was clear as she opened the door, looked around, then headed straight to the large wooden cabinet where we kept heirlooms. She tried pulling the drawer, then bent to check the lock on the safe. Her movements were furtive, her eyes scanning like a thief searching for something valuable. A tightness gripped my chest, a feeling as though the insult had doubled. I inhaled slowly, then spoke, my voice low but sharp. "You scorn tradition, yet you sneak into the family storage room at midnight." Elijah turned toward me, his eyes filled with pain and disbelief. He had tried so hard to trust his wife, to see the good in Brielle, to hold the marriage together. But this video was the final blow. I watched his eyes redden again, this time from shame and self-blame for being blind too long. "I've been living with someone completely fake," Elijah said, his breath heavy. "I didn't know her at all, not one bit." Each word seemed torn from his heart. I stepped closer, placing a hand on his back, feeling his breath shake as he fought to stay composed. Nothing hurts more than realizing the person you cherish is the one pushing you off the edge. The room fell into silence, not the silence of defeat, but of decision. My heartbeat struck harder, louder, urging me toward the truth that this was no longer just Elijah and Brielle's issue. It was a matter of the Harrington family. A matter of dignity, tradition, and everything I had spent my life protecting. I glanced at the ring on the table, its pale shine reflecting onto the ceiling. The ring had survived more than a century, weathered storms far worse than this. It would not be tainted by the greed of someone like Brielle, and I would not let this family be dragged through the mud by her deceptions. I turned to Elijah, my voice firmer than ever. It's time to set the trap. And from the moment I said it, the air in the room shifted as if the entire house understood that the counterattack had begun. From the moment I placed my hand on Elijah's shoulder and said it was time to set the trap, a different kind of quiet began to form inside me. A silence not born from endurance, but from someone waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I knew Brielle would never suspect anything if I acted gentle, because she always believed silent people were the weak ones. So the next morning, I walked downstairs with a calm expression. Brielle was stirring her coffee, her lips curled in the way of someone certain she held the advantage. I pulled out a chair and sat down, my face composed enough that she completely let her guard down. "Did you sleep well?" I asked, my tone soft as if nothing had happened. Brielle glanced at me, then let out a short laugh, a sound sharp enough to chill another person's spine. "How easy," she muttered while fixing her hair, thinking I couldn't hear. "This black mother-in-law is easy to fool." Her words dropped into the kitchen like a blot of ink falling into clear water. I kept my expression steady, though inside me another voice rose with a clarity sharper than sunlight. "You just insulted the thing I'm most proud of." I stood up and washed my hands under the running water. The steady stream blended with the plans forming in my head, each thought sliding neatly into place. Brielle believed everything was forgotten, that I was weak and forgiving. But my silence was a shadow waiting for her to step into the exact spot where escape would no longer be possible. When I left the kitchen, the phone on the living room table buzzed. I did not intend to listen, but as I walked past, Brielle's voice spilled loud and clear. "That old woman thinks she's classy just because of that cheap ring." Her tone dripped with mockery, as if she were the one granting favors to this house. Tasha Monroe's laugh chimed through the speaker, distorted slightly by the small phone speaker. "You're doing great. You'll get everything soon." I stood still at the doorway, listening without needing to step closer. Their words fell into my ears like heaven-sent proof, stacking themselves into a noose, tightening slowly around Brielle's neck. That afternoon, I went into my study and opened the family contact list. Names appeared, each belonging to someone who carried a piece of the Harrington lineage, each knowing the weight of that responsibility. I typed a short message, so brief it took only 3 seconds to read. "This weekend meeting, no absence." The moment I sent it, I knew everyone who received it understood the seriousness beneath those words. Such messages were reserved only for threats to the family's honor, tradition, or very existence. After sending it, I placed the phone back on the desk. There was no need for explanation. The Harringtons have always been this way, few words, but deeply understood. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes, letting a calm swell like an undercurrent rising beneath still waters. These decisions were not for personal revenge, but to protect what I had guarded for nearly a lifetime. I exhaled slowly, and when I opened my eyes, even the room felt different. That evening, Brielle walked into the living room with excessive confidence. She was trying on a new necklace bought with money she hadn't paid, her gaze sliding past me as if she already ruled the house. "I will be the lady of this home soon," she said with unhidden pride. "Just wait." She approached the mirror, fixing her hair, her smile spreading like she was steps away from wearing a crown. I remained on the couch, my hand resting on the ring, already cleaned, its shine reflecting faintly on the wall, like a reminder of the true value of this family. I watched her without revealing anything. Then I spoke, my tone so light, Brielle mistook it for resignation. "Yes, you will see." The words drifted into the air like a dangling thread, quiet yet sharp enough to shift the entire story's direction. And Brielle had no idea she had just walked straight into the trap. The weekend arrived faster than I expected. From early morning, the house carried a different feeling, like the air before a storm breaks. I walked down to the living room and checked the velvet box on the table, my eyes resting on the soft fabric holding the ring, its cold glow still steady. It was not only the family heirloom, but also the proof of everything Brielle had done. Every time I looked at it, I saw the image of her hand throwing it into the trash, reminding me exactly why this meeting had to happen. Each family member arrived on time. No one spoke much. No one asked for explanations. The shared glances said enough. This was a gathering no one dared to miss. The older women sat together, their eyes fixed on me with caution. The men stood near the fireplace, arms crossed, as if bracing for something heavy. The atmosphere tightened, and the room seemed to hold its breath. Then Brielle appeared. She walked in wearing a blazing red dress, a color so vivid it looked like she meant to overpower the entire room. Her heels clicked with confidence, her posture declaring victory before any battle began. When her eyes met mine, she smiled with open defiance. "I'm sure you'll apologize to me in front of everyone today." Her words floated out lightly, as if she truly believed she was stepping toward triumph rather than standing at the edge of a cliff. I did not answer, but the moment Brielle spoke, I noticed the shift in the room. Several people frowned, others turned their faces away. Not because they feared her, but because they knew she had no idea who she was speaking to. Brielle still did not understand that the silence of this family was the kind of silence that could bury someone in a few sentences. She stepped further into the room, looking from face to face as if waiting for applause. The room remained still as stone. No one clapped. No one spoke. The silence sharpened, slicing through the air like a blade. Brielle hesitated for a brief second, her eyes darting across the expressionless faces staring back at her as if trying to see deeper into what they truly thought. She found no approval, no admiration. Only cold disapproval from people who had seen far too many masks fall to be fooled by vanity. Elijah stepped forward from behind, standing beside me. His face was calm but firm. Brielle saw him and her hand faltered, unable to hide the flicker of fear in her eyes. Her confidence began to crack, just a thin line, but I noticed it immediately. I moved to the center of the room, resting my hand on the velvet box. This box on a normal day would symbolize blessings and honor for the one receiving it. But today, it held something else entirely, something Brielle never expected. I looked slowly around the room, then said in a voice clear enough for everyone to hear, "Before anyone speaks, I want all of you to see this." My fingers slipped under the clasp of the box. The soft click echoed through a silence so deep, even a pin drop would have sounded loud. Brielle stared at the box, her eyes fixed, as if she sensed something terribly wrong, but it was too late to step back. I opened the lid. Light spilled onto the velvet, revealing what lay inside. Not a blessing, not the honor she had imagined, but the truth, plain and uncompromising. The moment the lid lifted, the room erupted. Sharp breaths escaped, chairs scraped, someone gasped loud enough to echo. Brielle stumbled back a step, her face draining of color. She had no idea what was waiting for her beyond that moment, and I stood there watching everything unfold, fully aware that from here on, Brielle had no way back. The room was still trembling from the moment the velvet box was opened. The light reflecting off the ring nestled in the red velvet left everyone frozen. But what stunned them was not its beauty, it was the unspoken question lingering in the air. Why was the family heirloom brought into such a tense meeting? Brielle stood as if turned to stone, her lips trembling, her eyes darting around the room, desperately searching for an escape. I watched her for a long moment before placing another object on the table, something that made the entire room lean forward to see. I set Elijah's phone beside the velvet box, then switched to the photo album. A picture appeared clear and merciless. The ring lying in a white trash bin, buried among tissues and fruit peels, exactly where Brielle had thrown it without a second thought. I held the phone up for everyone to see. "This," I said, my voice slicing through the room's suffocating silence, "is how you treated the soul of our ancestors?" Brielle gasped. She stepped back, her eyes widening as if unable to believe everything was being laid bare before the Harrington family. A few of the older women raised their hands to their mouths, while the men near the fireplace clenched their fists. That single photo, a moment that seemed trivial then, now became the opening blow to Brielle's unraveling. I lowered the phone onto the table, then opened the audio files. The moment the sound echoed through the room, everyone turned rigid. Brielle's voice burst out, filled with anger, disdain, and cruelty. Trash, poor family, ridiculous. Every word she had spat in the kitchen now boomed through the living room, amplified as if the house itself wanted the entire family to hear her insults again. The atmosphere thickened, so heavy it seemed even the heartbeat of the room paused. Brielle raised her hands to her mouth, but it was too late. Every word had already poured out. "Marrying Elijah will change my life. His family is rich. I'd be stupid to let go. That ring is cheap. Throw it out." I glanced at Elijah and saw his eyelids flutter as if each sentence slapped against his heart. For him, this was not just evidence, it was a verdict. Each sound hit Brielle like a brutal slap, making her shrink before the family's growing outrage. When the recording ended, silence pressed down on the room like a boulder. I straightened, placing my hand on the velvet box that remained open. "Some of you asked why I brought the ring here today," I said, my voice steady yet sharp as a blade. "Because I want everyone to know she didn't throw away just a ring. She discarded her respect for this family." My eyes locked onto Brielle's, leaving her no room to escape. "The item you threw away was insured at $165,000. Its actual worth could exceed $200,000. Whispers erupted. A few people couldn't hold back their shock. Elijah stared at the ring, his expression hardening as he swallowed humiliation on behalf of the family. Brielle shook her head, attempting to speak, but her throat tightened, turning her voice into shallow, panicked breaths. I stepped closer, the room's light casting sharp shadows across my face. "You threw away this heirloom," I continued, each word striking like a stone against Brielle's collapsing wall. "And you think we would keep you here?" The older members of the family nodded in agreement. Others shook their heads with visible disdain. Tasha Monroe, sitting behind Brielle, shrank into her seat, avoiding the burning stares around her. Elijah stood at my side, pale but no longer fragile. He had seen everything, the betrayal and the greed Brielle had hidden. Brielle swallowed hard, her eyes glistening red, her lips trembling, before she suddenly screamed, the sound ripping through the already tight air. "You don't understand anything. I was just—" But her sentence shattered in her throat as the family's cold glares closed in on her, leaving no space for excuses. The room locked around Brielle like a tightening cage, leaving her alone among truths she could no longer deny. And she still didn't know the worst part hadn't even been revealed yet. The room, after the final recording ended, still carried the weight of the family's outrage like a thick fog clinging to every person present. Brielle stood in the center, her face drained of color, eyes red and swollen, trembling hands gripping the edge of her dress. She searched every face around her for sympathy, but the gazes that met her were cold, sharp as forged steel. I sensed the breath of the entire room deepen, as if the ancestors of the Harringtons themselves had come to witness the moment of judgment. I stepped forward, feeling every set of eyes shift toward me. "Brielle Carter," I said, my voice cutting through the room stretched tight like a violin string. "On behalf of the Harrington family, I deliver the decision." Brielle flinched, her hands shaking even more. Behind her, Tasha Monroe pushed her chair back, distancing herself completely. I stared at Brielle unblinking. "From this moment on, you are not allowed to step into the Harrington house, not even a single step." Brielle opened her mouth as if choking on smoke, unable to form a proper sound. She pressed a hand to her chest and staggered backward. "Mother, Marvette, please, Her voice shattered like glass on stone. I didn't respond. No one in the room did. Their subtle nods confirmed that my sentence was also their collective will. Elijah stepped beside me. His face looked as if he had lived through years in one night, yet his eyes held a clarity I had never seen before. He turned fully toward Brielle, meeting her gaze with eyes devoid of softness. "I am divorcing you," Elijah said, each syllable firm as a hammer strike. "Tonight." A sharp gasp spread across the room, instinctive, impossible to suppress. Brielle collapsed into a chair, both hands clutching her head, muttering broken sentences. "Elijah, I love you. I was angry. I didn't mean—" But her words drifted through the room like shredded scraps of paper, stripped of all weight. No one looked at her. No one pitied her. The family had seen too much deception, too much manipulation to be swayed by tears spilled too late. The more she cried, the quieter the room became, the silence turning into something heavy and merciless. Then the phone on the table rang, its shrill tone slicing through the air. The caller ID flashed across Elijah's screen, unknown, debt collector. Elijah glanced at me. I nodded. He answered on speaker. "Brielle," a rough male voice barked thick with threat. "Pay your debt. If you don't, we'll come meet your new family." Brielle screamed so loudly it jolted the walls. "No, no, please, don't go to them. Don't involve them." The man on the phone laughed low and cruel. "Then pay up. $48,500. Final deadline is today. If not, you know what happens." Elijah ended the call. The truth had become undeniable. Everyone in the room saw it clearly. Brielle was not only greedy, deceitful, and disrespectful, she was a walking disaster, dragging dangerous people to their doorstep. Brielle crawled toward Elijah, clutching his pant leg like someone drowning, grabbing a rotten branch. "Elijah, please don't leave me. Help me. I have no one." Her eyes were swollen and streaked mascara smeared across her cheeks, her voice breaking in raw desperation. But Elijah stepped back firm. "I gave you a chance," he said, "and you threw it into the trash the way you threw the ring." His words froze the entire room. Brielle collapsed onto the floor, sobbing like an abandoned child. But her tears no longer had the power to save her. They belonged to her own greed, not remorse. I inhaled deeply, my eyes turning to the ring in the velvet ox. Its cold gleam reflected upward, waiting. The Harrington family still stood around me, waiting for the final decision. The ring could not be stained by dirty hands, but it also could not remain locked away. Brielle followed my gaze and understood. She shook her head frantically, tears spilling faster. "No, don't give it to someone else. It's mine. I'm the daughter-in-law." Her voice died when I turned to face the entire family. And a single question rose in everyone's mind, slicing through the silence like a blade. But the ring must have a keeper. Who? The room plunged into a silence even heavier than before. Elijah looked at me. The whole family looked at me. And I knew the next moment would change everything. The atmosphere after the sentencing felt as if it had washed every impurity out of the house. Brielle's departure left a heavy emptiness, but it also opened a door for peace to return. In the days that followed, I spent long hours in my study, staring at the ring on my desk and thinking about its future, about who would be worthy enough to hold it. The Harrington heirloom could never be given to someone who lived solely for themselves. It demanded a person of heart, of goodness, of true humility. Elijah grew quieter after the ordeal, but his eyes held a steadier, stronger light. One late afternoon, he stepped into the living room with a strange hesitation, as if hiding something behind him that he didn't want me to notice too soon. "Mom," he said softly, hope trembling under his voice, "will you meet?" I didn't have time to answer before he shifted aside, revealing a figure standing behind him. A young woman stood at the doorway, gentle posture, hair tied neatly back, clear eyes that didn't shy away. She wore no heavy makeup, carried no sense of showing off. She simply stood straight, hands in front of her, and the moment she saw me, she bowed deeply. "It's an honor to meet you." Her voice, warm and rounded, held no fear nor calculation, only sincerity. I invited her in and Elijah introduced her. "Mom, this is Grace Whitaker." Grace sat on the sofa, her back straight, hands resting neatly on her knees. Every movement reflected someone who understood respect without forcing it. "Elijah has told me a lot about you," she said. "I'm grateful to meet the woman who safeguards the family's traditions." Hearing that, I felt something soften inside my chest, like someone had placed a gentle hand there to soothe months of turbulence. I asked her a few questions, and not one of her answers was about glorifying herself. Grace spoke about her work at a small library she managed, about helping elderly patrons find their documents, about her habit of taking quiet morning walks to find peace before the day began. Every word was simple. Every word was sincere. As our conversation neared its end, she stood and politely asked if she could look around the house, curious about the old architecture of the Harrington estate. I agreed. Yet what moved me was not her interest in architecture, but the moment she stopped in front of the ancestral altar. Grace gazed at the portraits hanging above for a long time before turning to me. "Mom," she said softly, "may I ask something?" I nodded. She bowed her head, her voice quiet, as if afraid to disturb the sacred air. "May I clean the altar? I want every memory in this home to be honored." I froze, not because of the request, but because of how she said it. I had heard many people speak beautiful words to gain my favor. But Grace's tone was different. It held no self-serving intent, no desire to impress. It was the heart of someone who truly valued what belonged to others. I watched her lift a soft cloth and gently trace the edges of the altar, touching each corner with deep respect. Her movements were so careful, they felt like she was tending to the memories themselves, not just the objects. When she placed each frame back exactly where it belonged, I felt tears rise quietly. I turned away to hide them, but Elijah standing behind me had already noticed. He stepped closer, saying nothing, yet his small smile said everything. For the first time in months, I saw peace in my son's eyes. That evening, when Grace prepared to leave, she bowed again. "Thank you for today. I hope one day I can return, not as a guest, but as someone who can help you care for the things you cherish." When the door closed behind her, I stood still for several seconds, feeling the house breathe more easily. Elijah turned to me, his eyes asking silently, "What do you think of Grace?" I didn't answer at once. I walked toward the ring in its velvet box on the table. The lamplight reflected off the stone, casting a delicate, thin beam of light. A sign, a reminder, an answer. I placed my hand on the lid, feeling the cold metal seep through my skin. "Elijah," I said quietly but firmly, "a ring always knows who deserves to keep it." He froze for a moment, then nodded. I looked out the window where the streetlight cast a soft glow onto the floor, stretching the shadow of the velvet box across the room. In that shadow, I felt it clearly. The time had come. The day of the ring ceremony needed to be set. And from the moment the thought formed, the entire house seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the new fate of the Harrington heirloom. The day of the ring ceremony arrived on a clear morning, sunlight streaming through the large window and spreading across the floor like a soft golden cloth. I stood in the center of the hall, feeling time slow down, as if it wished to honor the sacred moment the Harrington family had passed down for generations. Familiar faces entered one by one, each solemn, each silent, as though they understood this was not just a ceremony, but the opening of a new chapter. Grace entered last, wearing a light blue dress, neat and unpretentious. She paused at the threshold, took a deep breath, then bowed to each person in the room. When her eyes met mine, I caught the slight tremble in her gaze, not from fear, but from the respect she carried for what was about to happen. I motioned for her to step toward the ancestral altar. The room fell quiet, leaving only the sound of steady breaths. I stepped forward, lifting the velvet box. "Grace," I said, my voice weighted with emotion, "you are the woman this family has been waiting for." The expressions around us softened. I heard Elijah exhale as though releasing a burden he had carried far too long. Grace placed a hand on her chest and bowed so deeply her shoulders trembled. She whispered, "I never imagined I would have this honor." I opened the box. Light from the ring spilled across my fingers like a small star waiting to be placed in its rightful sky. I removed the ring, feeling the cool but living metal. It had lived through generations of the Harringtons, through loss and reunions, through storms and peace. And today it had found someone truly worthy. "Give me your hand," I said. Grace extended her hand, trembling so much I had to steady it. When the ring touched her skin, tears immediately welled in her eyes. A single drop fell, landing on the wooden floor, leaving a tiny mark as deep as memory. "I promise," Grace said, her voice breaking, "to keep it with all my heart." I nodded, warmth spreading through my chest. The family members began to step forward one after another, offering blessings, placing their hands on Grace's or Elijah's shoulders. No one spoke loudly, but every word carried hope for a tradition that would now be carried by someone who understood its worth. I moved to stand before the family, closing a long chapter with my own words. "There is something I want everyone to remember," I said. "Those who see an heirloom as trash turn themselves into trash. Those who treasure it become part of history." There were nods throughout the room like a silent vow. Elijah squeezed Grace's hand, and I saw a smile on my son's face, a smile I had not seen for a very long time. A smile of peace, of a new beginning, of a family healed after a storm. The ceremony neared its end. As everyone raised their hands in blessing, sunlight from the window struck the ring on Grace's hand, making it flare like a witness sent from our ancestors. I placed a hand on her shoulder and whispered just loud enough for the two of them to hear. "From today on, you are the keeper of this family's soul." Grace bowed her head, tears falling again, this time from happiness. But just as the entire family joined together in warmth and blessing, the last door at the back of the hall suddenly swung open. A sharp click echoed across the silent room. A gust of wind slipped in, stirring the curtains. Everyone turned at once. I heard Elijah gasp, and the older relatives fell silent mid-sentence. Then a voice rang out, a familiar voice, so familiar it froze the entire room. "You think you're done with me?" No one moved. No one breathed. I turned slowly, my heartbeat tightening with each second. Standing in the doorway was the very person everyone thought had disappeared from our lives forever. The room fell silent as the figure in the doorway stepped fully inside, the light behind her stretching her shadow across the wooden floor like a dark streak no one wished to see again. Brielle stood there, hair disheveled, face smeared, eyes wide, as if she hadn't blinked after some frantic frenzy. She stared straight at me, then at the ring on Grace's hand, then at Elijah, the man she once thought was her ticket to a better life. "You throw me out and think I'll just disappear?" Brielle laughed, the sound cracking like shattered glass. "No, I'm the one who deserves." But her voice was cut off by the sharp footsteps of two men in black suits who stepped in behind her. One lifted a stack of documents and spoke clearly. "Brielle Carter, we've been hired to collect your debt. And by legal order, you are required to vacate the Harrington property immediately." His voice was low, unyielding. Brielle whipped around, her face draining of color. "No, no." "You promised you anything," the second man replied, "and your last guarantor canceled support 5 minutes ago." Every head in the room slowly turned toward Elijah. Elijah stood tall, his voice steady and calm. "Yes, I withdrew my guarantor form. From now on, your life is entirely yours to carry." Brielle collapsed. This time, not a single person looked at her with anger or pity. Everyone understood her downfall was something she had built with her own hands. The two men stepped forward, each taking one of her arms. She kicked, screamed, clawed at the air, but her voice dissolved into the room, stripped of threat, stripped of power, nothing left but hollow desperation. The door closed behind them, leaving the room lighter, like air settling after a storm. I turned back to Grace. She stood there, one hand on the ring, the other held tightly by Elijah. Her eyes glimmered with concern, not for herself, but for the peace of this family. I smiled and placed my hand on her cheek. "The ancestors chose you," I said, "and today you proved them right." Grace bowed her head, tears slipping down her face, but her smile shone as bright as sunlight, cutting through a long night. Elijah wrapped his arms around her, and for the first time in many months, I saw my son completely at peace. The family gathered around them, offering blessings, soft laughter, tender embraces. The light in the room grew warmer, gentler, as if the ancestors themselves were smiling in approval. I stepped back, watching the circle of happiness form, watching the ring on Grace's hand, watching Elijah's eyes, watching my family, and feeling something I had not felt in a long time, Peace. Family, I whispered to myself, has finally returned. And in that moment, I understood the greatest lesson life had tried to teach me. Not everyone who touches a treasure is worthy of keeping it, but the one who cherishes it with a sincere heart will make the entire family shine. The curtain swayed gently with the breeze. The afternoon sun struck the ring, making the central stone sparkle like an oath. One chapter had closed, a new one was beginning, and the Harrington family once again walked forward in the light.